Welcome back, everyone, to OpenLine. We have with us Ron Shultis. He's the policy director of the Beacon Center of Tennessee. He's joining us via Zoom. We're talking about funding for schools in Tennessee, the latest report from the Beacon Center that kind of details where the money is going. We have Matt here on the phone, so let's go to Matt. Hello, Matt.
I've been trying to figure out, in Metro, the school board, do you guys know what their salary is, the school board members? I just find it...
I don't think it's very much, but I guess I don't know. Do you know, Ron?
I don't, but that should be public information, I would assume. So it should be pretty easy to get. I mean, you can get the salary of every state employee and local employee, but I don't know it off the top of my head. No, sorry, Matt.
I don't think that's not like a huge number, but yeah, I guess we'll try and Google it. Do you have another thought with that, Matt?
Well, yeah, it's I tried to find it myself. It's very hard to find. I haven't found it. I can find council members' pay, but the school board is. I mean, before the pandemic, the board couldn't decide anything without a lot of times going out of town on a little trip and get-togethers to think about stuff. They couldn't just have a meeting there at the district office. You know, seemed like it's kind of some cushy spending there going on. Yeah, I'm just wondering what their salary is.
Okay. All right. Well, it's a good question. I don't know off the top of my head. We can look into that. All right. Thank you, Matt. All right. So he's questioning, obviously, I guess, salaries. He's questioning cushy sort of trips, that kind of thing. When you look at the money, do you find anything like that? Is that part of what you're looking at here, like trips for school board members or anything along those lines that would kind of raise some eyebrows?
That information is not something that we include in this. This is a little bit more aggregate. However, if Matt and others are more interested in that kind of report, we do something at the end of every year called our pork report, where we highlight waste, fraud, and abuse across both state and local governments every year. So, normally every year we highlight hundreds of millions of dollars in waste, fraud, and abuse and things like that. So more of that government watchdog role is something we do try and hold our elected officials accountable. But that's not something that would have been included in this data. It doesn't get that kind of specific, and it wasn't the focus of this. But we do things like that every year. So be on the lookout, usually around after Thanksgiving, our annual pork report, something that we've done for, I believe, like 15 years.
And I've seen that almost every year. I'm not aware of Metro school board members being a big part of that. But yeah, you'd have to go back and look at each one of those. I think it's a tough job. These school board members have a very hard job. They are on the front lines in every county. They're on the front lines of these massive decisions at a very difficult time. Has COVID impacted spending in any way? Would it show up in these latest numbers that you've put together here?
Not yet, because of how the budget year goes and then how long it takes to create the report that we use for the basis of this. We would see that next year. We've talked about doing another one sooner. Like I said, we've done 3 over the past decade, but so much money is coming into our school systems as a result of all the federal stimulus funds, that such a large portion of it does have to go for education purposes. We've talked about measuring that impact, but it wouldn't be reflected yet in this data. So
you've talked about how complicated the BEP is. That's the funding formula for schools. You've said you want it simplified. You're not an inconsequential voice when it comes to the legislature. Do you think it will be simplified? Is the BEP set in stone? Or do you think we'll see changes?
Well, it's set by state law, right? So any law can be changed. And so I think there is going to be some growing calls for some reforms in this area, just particularly with due to the charged nature of what different school districts have done during COVID. But I think also there's been a growing sense that it's time, right? It's a system that is not inherently transparent. It's really hard for local or state officials to go back to their district and explain, kind of like how I mentioned earlier, the state says we're going to increase teacher salaries by 2%. And then people wonder, teachers wonder why they didn't get a 2% pay raise because of the inner machinations of that formula. So I think there's just kind of becoming a growing sense in updating that and moving towards more of that model. So I think you're going to see increased calls to do so for sure.
And when there is reform, people worry that that would mean there would just be less money given. Sounds great to make it more transparent, more simplistic, but is anything you're asking here, are you requesting that less money go to schools?
Well, it wouldn't be any kind of reduction in the total, right? Because you're talking about the same amount of money, you're just changing in how it's allocated. I do think you could see a slight increase just because of the less bureaucracy in figuring out what certain school districts should get. I think what we've also seen, there could be calls to, maybe create some kind of transition period, right, and holding harmless or something like that. I'm not saying that that's what should do or what could be done. I don't know what the differences will be, but I think we've seen, our state to kind of use that approach. For example, holding districts harmless due to the drop in enrollment during COVID, right? Such the weird time, with so many parents opting for homeschool the past year, or just, there were reports of Nashville not being able to find where certain thousands of students were. So the state decided to hold districts harmless over the past year in terms of funding. But at the end of the day, it's, if you want to make sure that your school specifically isn't losing, or your district specifically isn't, well, then it's to deliver a good service, right? And so people will move to, this happens all the time where parents they sell their home and move to a different area because they think a different area has better schools, right? And that's the number one type of school choice that we see, is parents moving to different districts. And so when you see this kind of reform, then the districts that offer a good service and good schools are going to be rewarded for that.
Do you support public education, or are you wanting to change public education in some way? I think there's some who worry when you start talking about money following students and that kind of thing. Does the Beacon Center, do you all support public education?
We have always supported a parent's right to choose. And what we know is the vast majority of parents are going to choose the public school system, which is fine. What we're saying is parents should have that choice. And so then if they're going to choose the public school system, just like how we do with our pork report, we want to make sure that our dollars are being used well, that the parents who choose to put their kids in the public school system, they're actually getting good service for that. And so that's why we've done this report. It's not to say that, our public school system needs dismantling. It's that we know that it serves the vast majority of kids in our states, and we want it to serve them well. And so how do we go about doing that in reforming the system to make sure that the dollars are getting where they're intended to in the classroom?
And that reform that you're calling for is what exactly? It would be what?
Well, like I said, moving towards a more student-based budgeting formula where the dollars follow the students. That increases transparency. It allows us to hold officials more accountable, and then also ensures that we can create a better model to where we have more control over how those dollars are used. And so whether that's at, through the local level or the state level, to make sure that we're keeping pace with the national average and giving Tennessee students the best education they deserve.
Is that a boon to private schools if the money follows the student?
It wouldn't be, because unless you create or expand the existing choice programs that we have, when you talk about reforming the BEP, for example, that school funding formula, that's talking about public school systems only.
So when you say the money follows the student, you don't mean that if the student left and went to a private school, the money would go to that private school, follow the student to the private school?
You would have to create a totally different type of program for that. So, for example, the ESA program, there are 2 ESA programs that the state has created. One is for special needs, that's statewide, and then we have the other one that's solely in Davidson and Shelby County. I will note, for those programs, only a portion of the dollars follow the student. But when we're talking generally about reforming the BEP, we're talking about public school to public school. This doesn't mean that all those funds would go with the student to the private school.
Okay.
To a private school.
All right, interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll take a break. Come back for our final segment. Be back right after this.